Hey guys, tonight we're slipping barefoot through dew-wet grass, somewhere between myth and mulch, heading deep into a jungle so alive it breathes louder than you. The moon is cracked like an old coin above your head, casting silver on ancient stone, and from the trees somewhere out there, a bird calls out in a voice that sounds a little too human. You reach a clearing, and there it is, Angkor Wat, still, silent, and just a little smug, like it knows what you're about to learn. Because beneath those sandstone towers, between those endless corridors etched with God's mid-orgasm, is a secret the history books often skip. The Khmer Empire wasn't just building temples, it was engineering desire. You smell incense. Sweet. Sticky, spiced with something unfamiliar. Your lips tingle a bit. You glance at your fingers. There's sap on them, and the ants crawling up your ankle don't care that you're trespassing through sacred territory. Every step here feels charged, like the ground remembers the weight of royal bodies, and the leaves overhead remember the soft gasps of palace gardens at midnight. You're not just here to visit, you're here to feel. But before we get too cozy, fair warning, you probably won't survive this in the way you think. Your expectations? Slaughtered. Your mental image of ancient empires as dusty and sexless? Melted like butter under Cambodia's sweltering sun. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. I want to know where and when you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're moving now, gliding along a causeway that stretches over still water. Reflections ripple, and your footsteps feel ghostly. The stones you're walking on? They were laid in place not just for pilgrims and kings, but for processions dripping in perfume and intent. Some nights, if the wind is right, they say you can still smell betel and sandalwood, the aphrodisiac blend that once flavored every courtly kiss and backroom bargain. This isn't just architecture, it's foreplay in stone. You enter the heart of the complex. It's darker here. Carvings dance along the walls, celestial maidens, the apsaras, hips cocked, smiles frozen in that exact moment, just before an invitation becomes a confession. Historians still argue whether these figures were spiritual or sexual, but standing in front of them now, you can feel the flirtation carved into every flowing sash and sideways glance. These were not decorations. These were blueprints for desire. Now, imagine this. You're a visiting noble, draped in fine silk, already buzzed on honey wine, laced with God knows what. A servant hands you a fresh betel chew, and you take it, of course you do. It's rude not to. Your mouth warms, your blood stirs. You can feel your heartbeat in your fingertips. The music starts, bells, flutes, the slap of drums that mimic something more primal. A single apsara begins to dance, not for the gods, for you. The air thickens. Something tugs at your skin, like the whole temple has leaned in closer. You don't understand the language, but your body does. That was the trick of the Khmer. They didn't separate sacred from sensual, they layered them. A potion could be a prayer, a kiss could be a contract, and a climax? That was divine combustion. The moment the human and the god briefly touched, and sometimes swapped places. You think you know what an empire's foundation is? Try again. In the Khmer Empire, it was often oil, sweat, and carefully selected. Herbs brewed under a full moon. And here's where it gets really spicy. Not metaphorically, literally. Take the royal kitchens, steamy, fragrant, and more pharmacological than culinary. There was a cook, maybe named something lost to time, who specialized in what the palace called tonics of warmth. Think chili, blended with coconut, ginger with deer marrow, a dash of fermented fish sauce. Yes, that smell was intentional, and suddenly, you've got a soup that doesn't just heat the body. It heats intent. Lovers would sip this before sneaking off to garden alcoves, drapes of lotus leaves muffling their laughter. One documented tale lifted straight from a dusty corner of Eleanor Herman's Sex with Kings tells of a young queen married to an older, uninterested monarch who took matters into her own hands by commissioning a personal apothecary. The man whipped up a blend of jasmine, lemongrass, and a shredded root called the serpent's tongue. Rumor says she bathed in it. That night, she wore nothing but a veil, walked into court, and asked her husband to publicly list 10 reasons why he loved her. He couldn't, but the general could. Loudly, he was executed the next day. Her smile reportedly lasted weeks. Of course, historians still argue whether that particular queen existed, or if she's just an allegory stitched together from gossip, poetry, and male fear. But the ingredients in her story? All real, all traceable. In temple records and Khmer pharmacopoeia. And every one of them was used not just to spice food, but to tweak desire. Because the body, to the Khmer, was an altar. What you fed it mattered. What you rubbed on it mattered more. Let's talk about that. Oils. You've probably seen modern massage oils with lavender or eucalyptus, right? Now imagine that idea dialed up to 11. Saffron-infused coconut oil, aged in copper jars, laced with crushed orchid petals and a resin that only grows on the shaded side of one specific mountain. Applied by trained hands, usually court healers who were half doctor, half matchmaker. This wasn't just about muscle relief, it was mood alchemy. Touch was considered medicine, and pleasure? A diagnostic tool. And yet, even with all this sensual fluency, the Khmer Empire kept secrets. Rituals only performed during eclipses. Dances choreographed to mirror the lunar cycle. Love spells etched in Sanskrit and hidden beneath beds. One fringe tidbit? Archaeologists once found a small bronze mirror buried in the wall of a bathhouse, wrapped in silk and sealed in beeswax. The inscription translated roughly to, "Only those who see themselves can summon another's want." Yeah, they believed reflection was a gateway. Narcissus meets Tinder. So why don't we hear about this stuff? Why did your textbook skip the footnote about how an empire's most potent weapon might have been a perfume recipe? Colonialism, for one. Victorian sensibilities didn't play nice with tantric symbolism or carved nipples on temple walls. But also, there's the discomfort of admitting that ancient people weren't just smarter than us. They were often kinkier too. They didn't separate body from soul or lust from logic. They knew that an empire needs more than walls and water. It needs heat. It needs want. And you, standing there in the shadow of Angkor's towers, feeling the damp press of ancient humidity and the ghosts of unspoken names, you start to get it. The past isn't dead. It's just whispering in a language you're finally learning to hear. You press your tongue to the roof of your mouth, and there's a taste metallic, peppery, unfamiliar. It lingers like a forgotten kiss. You've just bitten into a betel nut, wrapped in lime-dusted leaf, slick with clove syrup. And as the tang spreads through your bloodstream, your lips start to tingle. No, not metaphorically, literally, that bright red lipstick look. It's not Maybelline. It's centuries of Khmer flirtation, smeared across the mouths of lovers, queens, and anyone hoping to turn conversation into combustion. You chew slowly, and it's like lighting a fuse under your tongue. The betel nut wasn't just chewed, was curated. Each packet prepared with the meticulousness of a love letter, folded tight with whispers, hope, and a mild narcotic buzz. For the Khmer, red-stained teeth weren't a beauty flaw. They were evidence of intimacy, of appetite, of someone who'd tasted the world and wanted more. You imagine the ritual, a lady-in-waiting kneeling in the shadows of a temple, preparing the perfect blend: young areca nut, fresh betel leaf, a dot of lime paste, a sliver of cardamom, and sometimes a shaving of camphor bark for that cooling hit. She wraps it tight, ties it with a strand of hair, hers or his, depending on the message, and delivers it with a lowered gaze. A royal wink disguised as a digestive, You walk further, and your vision drips a little at the edges, not from drugs, but from time warping around you. You're beginning to see how a single substance could sit at the crossroads of medicine, mysticism, and erotic mischief. A king might chew betel before counsel to appear composed, virile, and ever so slightly unpredictable. A concubine might suck on one before entering the royal bath, her mouth already humming with heat. And outside the palace, in the villages, where wood smoke curls like lazy fingers through banana leaves, couples would share one like a cigarette biting from opposite ends, not quite touching, but close enough to feel the pull. This wasn't just about sensation. This was social code. A red mouth could signal availability, fertility, or simply a long night ahead. And yes, there were side effects: stained teeth, mild addiction. But in a world without Tinder, you used what you had. And what the Khmer had was chemistry. There's a story told in hushed tones, recorded not in temple walls but in the softer ink of oral tradition. A royal scribe once fell in love with a high priestess. Forbiddance, obviously. She belonged to the sensual gods, he belonged to paperwork. But love doesn't care. So he started sending her betel packets, each one flavored differently. Cinnamon, tamarind, smoked clove. Over months, she began to anticipate them. Her attendants noticed her lips grew redder, her prayers breathier. One night, she slipped a packet bet bitter almond. Poisonous if consumed whole. A joke, maybe. He took it anyway. Survived. Proposed. She declined, laughing. But she also sent him a new mix the next morning. Rose petal and honey. Not a yes. Not a no. Just ... the next chapter. Historians still argue whether this scribe ever truly existed, or whether he was an archetype, a stand-in for every low-born heart that dared beat faster in a sacred corridor. But the practice? Oh, it's real. Betel became an erotic medium, the mouth a message board. And the stain? That was the ink. Now your heart is starting to beat in rhythm with the cicadas. The air is thick, heavy like a warm quilt, and you can feel the history sticking to your skin. You think of the nights when Angkor Wat wasn't just a temple, but a backdrop for ceremonies designed to dissolve the line between heaven and libido. Picture a gathering, torches flicker, shadows dance. A group sits cross-legged around a brass dish filled with crushed betel, fermented palm syrup, and roasted sesame. They chew, they chant, they sway. It's part drug trip, part prayer, part very slow flirtation. A dancer, eyes half-lidded, sways forward. She puts a packet into your hand. You look at her. She's smiling, not at you, at the gods. But somehow you're still involved. You begin to understand that the Khmer didn't approach desire the way we do. They didn't hide it in locked drawers or veil it in euphemism. They carved it into walls. They flavored it. They chewed it. And when they loved with their entire senses, taste included. Some colonial accounts found centuries later describe European missionaries being horrified by the custom. Blood-red teeth, clearly barbaric. Women preparing chew for men. In public, scandalous, but they missed the point. This wasn't savagery, it was sophistication. A kind of social literacy that relied not on written words but on spices, textures, and the way your saliva thickens when you're thinking of someone. Too much. The betel ritual was also political. To be given a specially prepared chew by a member of the royal family was an invitation. Not just to pleasure, but to conspiracy, alliance, maybe even betrayal. It was a sign you were trusted enough to taste what they tasted, to share their high. No wonder every courtship, every power move, often began with a red smile and a copper. Dish. In the cool recesses of a side corridor, you find remnants of an old betel tray, its compartments still stained. One for lime, one for sliced nut, one for powdered spices. It's been centuries, but the design remains oddly familiar, organized, ceremonial, seductive, like foreplay with a checklist. You imagine who last touched it. Maybe a concubine waiting nervously before being summoned, or a priest preparing for a sacred union, or maybe just a tired official slipping away for 5 minutes of altered perception and self-comfort. One fringe tidbit: beetle chewing was believed to ward off evil spirits, not because of its properties, but because spirits apparently hated the smell. So chewing became not just sexy but protective. You weren't just preparing for pleasure. You were fortifying your soul. And now, the irony: modern Southeast Asia still chews betel, mostly among elders. You might pass a wrinkled grandmother in a Cambodian market, her smile a riot of red, and assume it's a fading habit. But remember this: that mouth once knew seduction as a language. That smile once held stories your textbook sanitized. She's not old. She's a survivor of a time when your lips were tools of war, worship, and whispered promises. And as you stare back at the shadows in this temple, you wonder what your own mouth has forgotten how to say. You're not sure when the scent of honey started following you, but it's everywhere now: soft, fermented, floral with a hint of rot. Like something delicious just barely beginning to go wrong. That's how you know you've stumbled into royal territory. This was no casual snack zone. This was the hidden garden where honey wine dripped from clay jars into the mouths of kings and consorts, where golden liquid did far more than numb the tongue. You pass a half-collapsed arch wrapped in vines, step over a cracked fountain basin slick with moss, and suddenly you can picture it clearly: lanterns floating like jellyfish overhead, reeds rustling in rhythm with secret footsteps, and the slow clink of ceramic cups meeting under moonlight. This is where the trysts happened. The honey wasn't just drink, it was currency, lubrication, fuel. When the sun went down and diplomacy ended, desire took over, and nothing lowered a voice or a boundary quite like mead infused with jungle blossoms. You sit beneath a fig tree with roots thick as snakes, and it's easy to imagine the scene. A young prince, just back from a border skirmish, still smelling of sweat and victory, is met by a healer/hostess holding a clay jug marked with a lotus seal. No words, just a tilt of the jug, a trickle of gold into a jade cup, and suddenly, the air shifts. It wasn't just alcohol. It was spiked with bee pollen, wood fungus, and powdered deer antler ingredients, not for flavor, but for fire. His body flushes, his hands itch. Across the garden, a concubine rises, her silk gown glowing like flame in the low torchlight. He drinks. She moves. The night begins. Now this wasn't a one-off. These nighttime rituals were semi-official events: part entertainment, part spell, part psychological softening. Khmer royalty used pleasure strategically. You think your boss giving you drinks at the office party is manipulative? Try sharing a cup of aphrodisiac wine with the person deciding whether to invade your province. The Khmer knew that diplomacy had layers, and the thickest one was always personal. What you did with your body mattered, and who you did it with after 3 sips of enchanted nectar. That could change borders. Historians still argue whether these honey rituals were state policy or just unspoken tradition. But the records suggest patterns. When foreign dignitaries visited, the wine flowed heavier, and new dancers were trained, not just to perform, but to lure. One sex story that's floated down through several dusty journals involves a Khmer ambassador sent to a neighboring kingdom, possibly Kampa. Instead of forging alliances through military show, he brought honey wine. Lots of it. At one banquet, he allegedly offered it to the king's favorite courtesan under the pretext of cultural exchange. She drank. She danced. By morning, the alliance was inked. The joke? She defected to Angkor and became a court poet. Yes, her verses survived. Yes, they're spicy. One line roughly translates to, "His fingers wrote poems where no ink should flow." There's a fringe tidbit that ancient jars of Khmer mead were sometimes buried with the dead, not as offerings to gods, but to lovers waiting in the next world. Some tombs have revealed traces of honey wine sealed in lacquered gourds, tucked beside combs, jewelry, and small phallic talismans. It's like the drink wasn't just pleasure, it was passport. A way to say, I'm coming home warmed, sweetened, and ready. You think of that next time someone offers you a sip of something, just for fun. Because to the Khmer, taste was memory. And a drink could hold the weight of an entire affair. But let's talk texture. This honey wine wasn't smooth. It had sediment, bits of beeswax, flecks of unidentified root. It wasn't supposed to be easy. It was supposed to linger in your mouth, coat your throat, leave a trail. It got in your teeth. It reminded you, long after the night ended, what you'd tasted. And that was the point. A clean mouth forgets. A sticky one remembers. You run your tongue across your own teeth now, almost disappointed that there's nothing left but breath. The ghosts drank better. And don't let the romance fool you, these rituals had teeth. There's a famous Khmer folktale, possibly originating from temple servants and not the royal court, about a queen who discovered her husband was sharing the honey wine with a favorite guard. Not unheard of bisexuality wasn't scandalous in Khmer elite circles, but betrayal? That stung, so she changed the recipe. Added crushed scorpion shell and a trace of monkey bile known to cause hallucinations and nausea when brewed improperly. That night, as the king toasted his soldier lover, he drank deeply. By sunrise, he was found wandering naked through the temple garden, convinced he was being chased by golden bees. The queen, of course, denied everything. Said the batch had gone sour, no charges, but the guard disappeared. Some say she sent him north to live in quiet exile. Others say she buried him beneath the fig tree. Either way, she kept the recipe. You lean back against that same fig tree now, half wondering what secrets its roots still hold. This isn't just history. This is residue. Every time you catch that fermented sweetness in the air, it's not just rot, it's a reminder that love, lust, revenge, and power have always shared a bottle. And the Khmer? They just figured out how to distill it first. The scent hits first thick, earthy, fermented. Sweet like sap, but undercut with something animal, something forbidden. You're standing at the edge of a grove, and the trees in front of you aren't just trees. They're witnesses. Tall palms swaying with secrets in their crowns, roots twisted like old gossip. You watch as a figure barefoot, shirtless, sinewed climbs one, dagger between teeth, a small ceramic pot strapped to his hip. This isn't about coconuts. He's toddy tapping, cutting just the right place to let the sap drip, slow and sticky, into the vessel. You're not just watching someone harvest a drink. You're watching someone flirt with chemistry. Because this stuff, this cloudy nectar, will ferment within hours under the Khmer sun. By nightfall, it's not juice, it's jungle wine. And more than that, it's bait. You follow him back through the trees, the pot sloshing gently at his side. The air is changing, more humid, more intimate. There's a clearing up ahead, and it's not empty. Two lovers, young, breathless, wrapped in mismatched silks, are already waiting, crouched behind a curtain of banana leaves. They've laid out palm cups, sweet tamarind paste, and a crude little oil lamp flickering between them. When the tapper arrives, they don't speak. He pours. They drink. The rest is made of hands, of slow smiles, of knees brushing in the dust. This isn't just thirst. This is how boundaries dissolve. Because toddy was the people's aphrodisiac, cheaper, quicker, sneakier than honey wine. It didn't need palaces. It just needed shadow. The lovers sip, wince, laugh. The wine is sour, sharp, but it warms the gut and the groin. It makes skin feel too tight, then not tight enough. It's the kind of drink you share not because it tastes good, but because you want an excuse to lean closer. Now imagine you're a palace servant, low-ranking, invisible. You've seen the royalty bathing in rosewater and saffron oil, sipping golden liquors in silver cups. But you've got toddy and your own little rituals. You meet behind the spice shed, where cardamom grows wild and no one bothers checking for propriety. The drink is hidden in old rice jars. The air smells like cloves, smoke, and wet earth. One sip, and suddenly you're not thinking about caste or titles, or whether this tryst will get you flogged. You're thinking about their breath on your neck, about fingers tangled in your hair, about how damn good it feels to want something when you're not supposed to. One fringe tidbit: palm sap was sometimes boiled down into a syrup so potent it was used in fertility ceremonies. Mixed with powdered deer antler or crushed river snail shell, it became a thick elixir meant to prepare the womb, according to midwives' oral traditions. But midwives weren't just health workers, they were also matchmakers, herbalists, and sometimes quiet rebels. They'd slip toddy syrup to young women before their wedding nights, not just for physical readiness, but for confidence. Because a body warm with sap is harder to shame. And in a society where virginity was both weapon and currency, a bit of artificial bravery could change everything. Let's not pretend it was all romantic. There's a story from the court of Jayavarman VII, not well known outside niche circles, about a scandal involving a noblewoman, a visiting monk, and 2 pots of heavily spiced toddy. They weren't supposed to be in the same room, but someone, maybe the monk, maybe the woman, spiked the drink with dried pepper flower, a stimulant known to cause euphoric sweating and hyper-touch sensitivity. The next morning, temple staff found them curled together on a prayer mat, clothes askew, mouths stained with toddy residue. The monk was defrocked. The woman disappeared. Some say she was sent to a mountaintop retreat. Others say she changed her name and became a toddy vendor by the river. Either way, her laughter was reportedly unforgettable. Historians still argue whether the tale is factual or a parable whispered to caution against mixing holy vows with fermented desire, but the recipe survives. You sit now in that imagined river market. Boats bob gently, the air thick with lemongrass and grilled fish. A wrinkled woman with eyes like sharpened almonds hands you a cup. It smells alive. You hesitate. She grins. For strong dreams, she says, and vanishes into the mist. You drink. It burns. It blooms. And for a moment, every passerby seems more beautiful, more possible. That's the danger. That's the thrill. That's what the Khmer understood better than most, that aphrodisiacs don't create desire. They strip away the noise that drowns it out. There's a darker side, of course. The same toddy that sparked forbidden's love also sparked betrayal. In the lower courts, where politics oozed beneath the throne like water under cracked tiles, there were stories of servants slipping too much toddy into a rival's drink, waiting for them to slip up to confess, to misstep, to fall into the wrong arms at the wrong time. Seduction was strategy. A single drunken slip could mean exile or execution. You think of a young advisor, drunk on fermented palm and power, whispering state secrets into the shoulder of a dancer he thought he could trust. She smiled. She listened. And she reported everything before sunrise. The next day he was sent to dig irrigation ditches. No trial, just thirst, turned into consequence. And yet, the toddy survived. It's still drunk today in rural Cambodia, though now mostly by farmers at the end of long harvest days. Sweetened, sometimes mixed with lime or ginger. You might see an old couple share it on a stoop, their eyes crinkling at a joke no one else hears. And you wonder, was this always their drink? Did they once sneak off behind the spice shed? Did they once drink from the same palm cup, letting their fingertips brush longer than was proper? You'll never know. But the way they sip says yes, so. Now sitting here in the dark, surrounded by the ghosts of trees that once wept sap for lovers and spies alike, you begin to understand. This isn't a forgotten drink, it's a living story. Sweet, sharp, and always slightly dangerous. Just like love, you're staring at a wall, Not just any wall, though. This one moves slowly, rhythmically, in stone. The bas-reliefs at Angkor. Tom breathe with life, their carved limbs locked in a dance so hypnotic you barely notice how sensual it is. A tilt of the chin, a curl of the wrist, a foot lifted just enough to suggest intention, not just movement. The Apsaras. Divine dancers. Suspended in sandstone mid-step, forever caught between heaven and heat. You squint, and it feels like they're swaying just slightly, hips rocking with ancient knowledge. The Khmer didn't just carve beauty, they choreographed seduction, and it worked. Because to this day, scholars still argue whether these women were purely mythical or modeled after real court dancers, whose roles blurred the line between spiritual emissary and state-sanctioned aphrodisiac. Now imagine walking into a royal hall lit only by oil lamps. The smell of lotus, old wood, and sweat clings to every surface. You're seated on a woven mat beside a prince, barely of age but already weighed down with ceremonial gold. He's trying to look composed. You can see his hands tremble slightly. Across from you, the Apsaras enter, not the stone ones, the living ones. Skin painted with crushed pearl dust, hair lacquered into gravity-defying coils, each toe-ringed foot kissing the floor like a promise. The music begins, a rhythm that seems synced with your own pulse, and they move, but not all at once. Each dancer locks eyes with a single person in the audience, a silent claim. The prince tries not to blink as his chosen dancer circles him. Her gestures slow, coded, a fan flick, a shoulder drop, a backward glance. You're watching not a performance, but a ritual one designed to stir the unseen forces in the room. This isn't entertainment. This is alchemy. According to accounts passed through generations, Apsara dancers were trained from childhood not just in technique, but in the emotional science of desire. They studied the effects of pace, proximity, eye contact. One wrong hand, angle, one misplaced smile, and the spell would break. But done right, it could turn even the most stoic general into a murmuring puddle of reverence. The dance was designed to lead, not follow. And after the performance, it didn't always end with applause. It ended with selection, invitation, sometimes more. There's a tale that comes from a faded palm leaf manuscript unearthed near Banti Shrai about a dancer named Tevi. She was famed for her ability to perform the lotus unfurling, a movement sequence so slow, so precise, it was said to make onlookers feel like they were blooming themselves. Tevi's dance caught the eye of a widowed king who hadn't smiled in years. He summoned her. She arrived not in silks, but in funeral white, her body painted with ash and silver powder. Her dance that night wasn't of joy, but of grief seduced. Back into life. When she wept during the final bow, so did the king. He offered her a title. She declined. She asked only for a garden. He gave her 10. Historians still argue whether Tevi was real or a metaphor for art's power to console power. But temples in her region have carvings of a dancer with a tear-shaped birthmark on her cheek. Coincidence? Maybe, but the image lingers. There's something almost scientific in how the Khmer wove sexuality into aesthetics. The dancers weren't simply beautiful. They were engineered to move in ways that bypassed intellect and struck directly at the lizard brain. Feet always grounded, shoulders fluid, fingers unfurling in gestures that mirrored vines, flames, water. Their bodies told stories, and desire was always part of the plot. One fringe tidbit: in some ceremonies, dancers weren't allowed to speak for days beforehand. The belief was that silence charged their movements with greater energy, that every shift of weight, every fluttered hand, carried meaning too potent for words. Their bodies were incantations. Their sweat, a form of incense. You shift slightly, now imagining what it must have felt like to be chosen. Not just watched, but seen. Picked out of 100 nobles by the gaze of someone trained to read your breath. The dancer glides toward you after the performance, places a flower in your palm without touching you, and disappears behind a silk screen. The meaning is clear. You've been invited, not to sex necessarily, to intimacy, to participation in a lineage older than the empire itself. And you wonder how many alliances, how many betrayals began with a single Apsara's gaze. Of course, the role wasn't always romantic. Many Apsaras served in temples, performing dances for the gods rather than men. But even then, their movements were designed to stimulate divine energy. Think of it this way, in a worldview where gods were responsive to pleasure, where temples pulsed with symbolic fertility, an Apsara's dance wasn't performance, it was invocation. A way to draw down the divine into the world, to coax the cosmos into attention. The line between sacred and sensual wasn't blurred. It didn't exist. Colonial chroniclers were, unsurprisingly, scandalized. French explorers in the 19th century wrote about the indecent poise of the dancers, completely missing the sophistication behind the choreography. They saw bodies. They missed messages. And even today, watered-down versions of Apsara dance are trotted out for tourists who clap politely, never knowing that the original performances weren't meant for them. They were meant for kings, for gods, for someone who understood the conversation happening in muscle and motion. You sit quietly, watching shadows play across the temple wall, and wonder if you could still be seduced by a glance, by a gesture. If your modern brain, numbed by swipes and demiz, could still decode a language made of ankles and eyebrows. Maybe that's why the carvings still feel alive. Because you recognize that pose, that smile, that pause before the turn. They were flirting with you centuries ago. And you're finally paying attention. You step into a chamber that smells like crushed pepper and old secrets. The walls are dark, soot-streaked from generations of incense, and the only light comes from a shaft of sun slicing through a hole in the roof, catching motes of dust in something else oil. Thick, fragrant, glistening on a stone table like a sacrament. You lean closer. The scent makes your pupils dilate before you can stop it. Clove, sandalwood, turmeric, and something sharper star anise maybe, or some now extinct jungle blossom. That knew exactly how to bypass your brain and speak directly to your skin. This isn't perfume, it's a weapon. Welcome to the Khmer oil chamber. This was where the real deals were made, not with signatures, but with shoulders. Not with treaties, but with thighs. You hear footsteps behind you, soft and deliberate. And suddenly you can picture it. A royal emissary, robes barely clinging to sweat-slicked skin, being massaged down by an attendant whose job is both healer and strategist. Each stroke isn't just soothing, it's a spell. And you begin to understand why the Khmer court never sent diplomats without preparation. Because scent was armor, touch was calculus. And sometimes, what happened on that oil-slick table carried more weight than anything carved into stone. The recipes were closely guarded, passed from one temple to another, often whispered in coded language so outsiders couldn't steal the formulas. Some oils were said to inspire affection, others loyalty. Some, unrelenting arousal. One blend, known in court circles as tigers. Breath was infamous. A mix of camphor, egglewood, betel flower, and a splash of fermented snake gall. Rubbed behind the ears and under the arms. It was supposed to make the wearer irresistible for precisely 6 hours, then leave behind a smell. So pungent it acted as protection against unwanted follow-ups. Practical seduction. Burn after loving. Historians still argue whether the tiger's breath was real or apocryphal, but one palm leaf manuscript offers a recipe hauntingly close, with annotations that translate roughly to, only at night, never twice. There's a story half myth, half diary entry of a king who ordered every envoy from a rival empire to be greeted by dancers rubbed in one particular oil, known simply as whisper smoke. No clothes, just skin and scent. The envoy's seasoned, calculating, arrogant lasted 3 days before requesting a second meeting, this time in private. After the treaty was signed, one was heard muttering that they couldn't remember what was agreed upon, only how her shoulder had smelled when she leaned in to pour the wine. And that's the danger, or the genius. Depends who you ask. The act of applying the oil itself was ritualized. You didn't just slap it on like modern cologne. It was massaged into the skin by someone trained in pressure points, breath timing, and eye contact. The receiver would lie on a mat of woven banana fiber, and the attendant, often a blend of apothecary, dancer, and seducer, would begin at the feet, moving slowly upward. The oil warmed with body heat, releasing its full effect only after prolonged contact. By the time it reached the neck, the recipient wasn't just relaxed. They were open, soft, ready. This wasn't relaxation, it was infiltration. A way to bypass armor and slip messages under the skin. And when politics got messy, this process could become the battlefield. A well-oiled courtier could sway a decision faster than any army. Let's not overlook the gender play here. These oils weren't reserved for women. Khmer kings often received pre-meeting rubdowns from young male attendants, selected not for muscle but for elegance. Beauty wasn't seen as threatening, it was strategic. Androgyny, in particular, was prized in those who served as emissaries of the body. One court record describes an individual named Panlaka, no surname, no title, who was summoned to prepare a general before a delicate negotiation. The notes read, "Applied oil." No words exchanged. The general wept before dawn. We don't know what happened. We don't know what was said or unsaid. But that line has survived in temple archives, etched with reverence. And the general's decision averted a war. There's a fringe tidbit from a ruined bathhouse near Priya Khan. Archaeologists uncovered a small bronze bowl fused with traces of ginger oil and crocodile dung. Yeah, you heard that right. Crocodile dung. Used not just for its questionable antibacterial properties, but believed to have spiritual heat. A kind of primal fire, good for awakening the core. It was likely applied to the lower back and thighs before specific ceremonies. Risky, sure, but if you're trying to stir the gods or a lover, sometimes subtlety takes a backseat to sensation. Of course, it wasn't all glorious. There were misuses. One disgraced advisor, desperate to win back favor, allegedly doused himself in a version of the royal blend and appeared uninvited to a feast. The effect? Overpowering. Guests fainted. The king vomited. The man was exiled. His mistake wasn't the scent. It was the presumption. Because oil, like desire, was a tool. You had to be invited to wield it. The thing is, even now the echoes remain. Walk through any modern Cambodian market and you'll find vendors hawking oil's tiny vials labeled for luck, love, charisma. Some reek of menthol, some of jasmine, but a few, they carry something deeper. A musk that makes your thoughts blur for just a second. And you wonder, did someone remember the old recipe? Did a grandmother pass it down with a wink and a warning? The modern world loves to think it's invented everything. But desire? Chemistry? The art of touch and timing? The Khmer beat us to it. By centuries, you take one last look at the table. The oil has congealed slightly, catching the light in strange ways. It looks like amber, like honey, like something you shouldn't touch but deeply want to. You breathe it in. It burns a little. And just for a second, you feel yourself soften. The same way a general once did, or a queen, or a dancer. This isn't just history. This is formula. And the recipe still works. You hear it before you see it, a hiss. Wet and low, followed by the rustle of something heavy sliding across dry leaves. The jungle is quiet in that moment, as if holding its breath. Then the shape comes into view, thick and scaled, eyes like wet opals, tongue tasting the air with a flick you feel in your spine. A snake, longer than a man, coiled beside a stone altar slick with rain and what might not be just water. But the priests aren't afraid. They move with calm purpose, robes hitched above their ankles, blades in hand not to fight, but to bleed. Not the snake, themselves. They need to earn what the serpent gives. Because tonight, they're preparing the most powerful virility tonic in the Empire, an elixir of snake blood. Egg yolk and sacred herbs, fermented in copper and swallowed raw by warriors who believe that to take the life force of a snake is to become untouchable. Welcome to the world of Khmer masculinity myths, where potency isn't just power, it's protection. And snake blood? That's the passport to both. You step closer, stomach tight. The priest slices the snake's neck with surgical precision. Not enough to kill, just to offer. The blood drips into a coconut shell lined with crushed roots. Second priest stirs, muttering prayers that sound like they're half chanted, half dared. The liquid is thick, dark, and smells like copper and lightning. It's offered to a young man kneeling nearby, shirtless, skin already painted with charms drawn in turmeric. He drinks without flinching, not because it tastes good. Because flinching is weakness, and tonight he needs to prove that the gods favor his bloodline. The ritual is part initiation, part enhancement. What comes after is predictable. He'll be sent to the barracks or the royal bedchamber, depending on who paid for the ceremony. In Khmer society, virility was currency. And this was how you got the bank to open. Now let's talk scale. This wasn't just one village's superstition. Records suggest the practice was widespread across royal and military spheres. Snake blood was considered sacred, believed to hold the essence of transformation, because snakes shed, renew, survive. So if you ingested that essence, you too could become more than human. In fact, some royal lineage myths claim descent from Naga, the divine serpent beings of Khmer cosmology. Drinking snake blood wasn't metaphorical. It was ancestral return, a way to reconnect with the gods in the most visceral way possible. No incense, no chants, just warm blood and the sound of your own heart beating faster than it should. There's a story half love, half power play about a concubine who fell for one of these blood-drinking warriors. He was low-born, chosen for his body, not his brain. She was educated, politically savvy, and already bored of poems. But he had something she couldn't name. Maybe it was the way he didn't blink. Maybe it was the ritual ink still staining his ribs. Maybe it was how he said nothing, ever, unless spoken to. She started requesting his presence more often. Private dances, late-night readings. Eventually, she smuggled him books, clothes, a vial of imported perfume. They lasted almost a year before someone found a love letter written in his hand. It was clumsy, but passionate. The punishment? He was sent to lead a suicide mission on the northern border. Legend says he returned 3 months later, alive and unscarred, holding the heads of 2 enemy generals. The king promoted him. The concubine? She vanished. Some say she chose exile. Others say she became one of the first female military advisors in court history. Either way, she left behind a note. Blood remembers. Historians still debate the truth, but her ink, like the warrior's charm paint, never quite fades. Now, not all snake rituals involved drinking. Some were more symbolic. In one region near the tonal sap, newlywed couples were brought to a secluded shrine where a dried serpent's skin hung from the rafters like a curtain. They would step through it, together, hand in hand, to symbolize shedding their past selves and entering union renewed. The ritual was often preceded by a shared draught of fermented snake wine less potent than blood, but still spiritually charged. It was said to align rhythms, to make bodies speak the same language under moonlight. Whether it worked, that's between them and the gods. But local midwives claimed a spike in fertility the month after the ritual. Coincidence or chemistry? Still up for debate. One fringe tidbit worth squirming over. Some Khmer warriors wore amulets containing preserved snake fangs, boiled, lacquered, then sealed in wax and worn around the neck. These were believed to not only protect against venom, but to sharpen sexual edge, a euphemism for endurance and control. In high-ranking circles, men would boast not about their horses or swords, but about the rarity of their snake fang pendants. Some were said to come from mythical albino serpents found only in sacred mountain caves. One noble even reportedly died trying to retrieve one, falling into a pit of vipers that were less impressed by his titles than he hoped. But let's not romanticize everything. These rituals had costs. Handling venomous snakes, even in worship, was dangerous. Many healers lost fingers, some lost lives. And there were moments when the line between ceremony and spectacle blurred uncomfortably. Festivals where intoxicated men tried to prove bravery by biting live snakes. Temple guards having to intervene when boys dared each other to steal offerings from serpent altars. The same blood that symbolized strength could also stir recklessness. A reminder, desire when mixed with myth can burn brighter than logic. You're starting to see the pattern, aren't you? The Khmer didn't isolate the body from the spirit. They understood that power, whether sexual, political, or divine, was a circuit. And snake blood? That was a high-voltage cable. You drink it, you risk something. You gain something, maybe. Or maybe you just hallucinate and wake up naked under a fig tree. Either way, it moves the story forward. And in a culture where stillness was death, that movement mattered. In modern Cambodia, snake wine is still sold. In small glass bottles, often with the entire serpent coiled inside like a sleeping curse. Tourists buy them as novelties. Locals, they drink sparingly, sometimes on wedding nights, sometimes when fate feels especially slippery. It's a relic, yes, but also a reminder. That once, to prove you were man enough, or God-touched enough, or simply brave enough to love dangerously, you had to bleed the Earth's oldest symbol of survival and swallow its power whole. And tonight, you wonder, what would you drink to become more than yourself? What would you risk to shed your skin? You gag a little when the smell hits you, sharp, sour, unmistakably fishy. It's the kind of odor that punches through the air like a rude guest at a quiet dinner. Your eyes water, your stomach flinches. And yet, somewhere nearby, someone is licking their fingers. Because this, believe it or not, is the scent of seduction. Welcome to the world of prahok, the fermented fish paste that fueled an empires. Appetite, not just for food, but for fertility. You're standing outside a communal kitchen, and it's chaos in the most human way. Pots bubble, dogs bark, women shout instructions without looking up from their chopping. Beneath the banana leaf roofs, rows of clay jars sit aging in the sun, each packed with river fish, salt, and thyme. After a few weeks, what emerges isn't just edible, it's considered essential. A flavor so deep and umami-rich it bypasses logic and plugs straight into memory. But here's the part your nose might not be ready for. Prahok wasn't just food. It was used in rituals, love charms, even body preparation. You look confused. Of course you do. But the Khmer knew something. We forgot. That scent sticks. And what sticks? Seduces. Now imagine this. It's the eve of a marriage negotiation. A village girl has caught the eye of a local tax collector, a decent match. Wealth-wise, but emotionally colder than a whetstone. Her grandmother, a retired midwife with a sharp tongue and sharper instincts, brews up a sauce from prahok mixed with palm sugar, crushed garlic, and a single drop of deer musk oil. She smears it on grilled eggplant and serves it to the visiting suitor with rice and cucumber. He winces at first, but halfway through the meal, his shoulders drop. His speech slurs. His eyes drift toward her more than the food. He asks for seconds. That night, he sends a dowry twice the expected value. Historians still argue whether this story, passed down orally from healer to healer, is apocryphal or adapted from a broader tradition, but the ingredients match those listed in early Khmer medical scrolls under body scent harmonizing preparations. In other words, kitchen magic. Smell alchemy. It wasn't just women using Prahik's power. Men would eat it before rituals, sometimes rubbing a diluted version on their wrists and necks like a cologne for the bold and nasal impaired. It was believed that the strong scent acted as a truth serum disarming the guarded, drawing out the primal. Love potions disguised as lunch. And yes, sometimes this backfired. One story tells of a temple guard who overused the technique, slathering Prahik oil on his armpits before trying to seduce a dancer. She vomited. The next day, he was reassigned to latrine duty. Moral of the story? Even in ancient times, moderation mattered. Still, the broader belief persisted. Prahik connected body to earth, appetite to emotion. It wasn't refined or subtle. It was raw, feral, honest, and in a society that saw fertility not as a private matter but a national imperative, anything that stirred the senses was welcome. The line between nourishment and arousal blurred easily, especially when meals were communal, hands shared bowls, and every bite carried someone else's breath. Khmer dining wasn't quiet. It was intimate, and that intimacy bred possibility. 1. Fringe tidbit. In some court ceremonies, young couples undergoing pre-marriage counseling would be made to cook together using prahik as a base ingredient. The idea, if you can handle this smell together, you can probably survive anything. Elders would sit nearby, watching posture, listening for laughter or silence. It wasn't about the food. It was about chemistry, literal and relational. If they gagged in sync, a good sign. If one powered through while the other recoiled, not so much. Culinary compatibility was a love language, but let's go deeper into the symbolism. Fish, in Khmer cosmology, represented life, movement, persistence. To ferment it was to slow time, to capture vitality. Some temples even included small pools where fish were raised not for eating, but for ritual observation. The rhythms of their swimming were studied by priests who interpreted them as signs about the harvest, about marriage dates, about which herbs to use in seduction brews. So when a woman smeared fish paste behind her ears before a nighttime stroll, it wasn't just perfume, it was declaration. She was fertile, available, ready to stir water into story. Of course, not everyone appreciated the smell. Chinese and Indian travelers wrote with varying degrees of horror about the Khmer love of fermentation. They perfumed their bodies with rot, one account famously reads. But that's the thing. They weren't trying to impress outsiders. They were speaking their own language. And in that language, a ripe scent wasn't a flaw. It was proof of potency. There's a love story from the lower Mekong, half folktale, half cooking manual, about a widowed fisherman and a wandering merchant. The fisherman cooked daily for the merchant as thanks for shared boat space, and each meal was a slow escalation. First grilled fish, then soured soup, then finally a dish so strong-smelling the merchant choked mid-bite. But he finished it. The next day, he proposed. "If I can learn to love your food," he said, "I can learn to love your grief." They lived together for 20 years, every meal with prahik. You stare now at one of the fermenting jars, its lid slightly cracked. Inside, a paste bubbles slowly, alive with bacteria and promise. This isn't just food, it's transformation. A thing left long enough to become something else entirely. Like a kiss that turns into a question. Like a laugh that lingers a bit too long. You reach down, touch the rim. It's warm. The jar, like the story, is still cooking. Modern Cambodia still smells like its history. Street vendors fry prahik into omelets. Families eat it with mango or raw cabbage. It's the scent of memory, of home, of unspoken affection. And somewhere, out there, someone is still stirring it into a love charm. Not because it guarantees success, but because it guarantees honesty. You can't fake desire when your breath smells like fermented fish. You just can't, and maybe that's the real lesson here. Not all aphrodisiacs are pretty. Some are pungent, messy, unexpected, but they work because they break down our filters. They remind us that love isn't always roses and rosewater. Sometimes it's salt, rot, hunger, the willingness to share a smell with someone who doesn't flinch. So if someone offers you prahak, don't wrinkle your nose. Lean in, taste, swallow, see what stirs. You're on your knees now. Not in prayer, but in search fingers scraping along the mossy forest floor, lifting vines poking into soft soil. As the cicadas scream above your head like a chorus of malfunctioning alarms, you're not lost. You're looking for something. Something the old woman said was here, just beyond the termite mound, under the sleeping fern. And then you find it, a root, crooked like a witch's toe, pale and pulsing slightly with moisture. You break it free, and the scent that hits you is musky, floral, earthy like ginger if it had a secret. This is the root they whispered about in the court kitchens. The one ground into pastes and folded into rice cakes served only during eclipses. The one midwives guarded like gold, and dancers tucked into their hair before moonlit performances. It doesn't have a name in modern science, but among the Khmer, it was called the dreamer's tongue. Not for what it said, but for what it stirred. Welcome to the world of jungle aphrodisiacs, where desire wasn't bought in bottles, but foraged in dirt, chewed raw, and believed to speak directly to the spine. You walk back to the village with your prize. The old woman waits by the fire, eyes like storm clouds, hands busy grinding herbs in a mortar darkened by years of secrets. She nods when she sees the root, breaks it in half. Steam hisses from the center, and you're suddenly dizzy. She adds it to the mix, along with betel leaf, tamarind, and a drop of buffalo milk. "Drink," she says. You do. The taste is wrong, too sweet, then bitter, then oddly metallic. But your skin warms, your breath deepens. Your thoughts slow and curl inward like smoke. You blink, and the jungle looks different. Closer, hungrier. You're not high, you're open. The old woman smiles. "Now," she says, "go dream someone awake." These root brews were rarely made public. They were passed from forest healer to temple concubine, from dancing boys to lonely monks pretending not to need comfort. They weren't just potions, they were permission to want, to feel, to escape. The Khmer believed that some desires lived so deep in the body, they couldn't be summoned by touch alone. They had to be stirred from within, coaxed out like a tiger from shadow. And roots like this, pungent, rare, unpredictable, were the key. One documented account, buried in the footnotes of a French colonial pharmacist's journal, tells of a prince who refused to speak after a failed battle. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep, just sat in his quarters staring into nothing. The court healers tried everything, incense, prayer, even honeyed opium. Nothing worked. Finally, an old forest priestess was summoned. She gave him a tea brewed from the dreamer's tongue, mixed with crushed orchid and a sliver of gold. Leaf, that night, he woke screaming from a dream of fire and wet skin. The next morning, he demanded new armor, and 3 days later rode out to win back the territory he'd lost. Coincidence? Historians debate it. But the servant girl who washed his sheets said they smelled like flowers for a week. Some versions of the brew were more carnal, designed not to soothe, but to spark. Women would steep the root into bathwater, soaking with rose petals and peppercorns before court dances. Men would chew it raw before visiting lovers, letting the bitterness numb their lips, leaving a tingle that doubled as foreplay. The effect wasn't just physical, it was psychological. A sense of being unlatched from the world's dullness, floating just slightly above logic, able to feel everything more. One fringe tidbit: some Khmer artists reportedly used the root before carving temple reliefs. claiming it allowed them to see into bodies and sculpt more accurate curves, more alive expressions. You run your hand along a nearby carving, now a dancer mid-twist, her smile impossibly real, and you wonder what root her sculptor chewed before chiseling her into immortality. Not every use was erotic. Some were prophetic. Shamans claimed the root allowed them to access spirit dreams, lucid visions in which they received instructions for healing, warnings about enemies, or messages from ancestors. Often these dreams featured symbols of intimacy, intertwined serpents, flooded rice, patties, broken bangles on naked wrists. The connection was clear. The root didn't just unlock lust. It unlocked the liminal, the place where fear and longing share a bed. One tale, almost too poetic to be real, tells of a dancer who used the root before every performance, not to entice others, but to calm her own terror. She had been born during an eclipse marked by astrologers as too cold for marriage. No one courted her. No one even flirted. But when she danced, infused with the root's warmth, she glowed. People wept. One nobleman is said to have watched her from behind a curtain for 6 years, never daring to speak, only leaving gifts, sandals, silk, a poem stitched into the lining of a cloak. When he finally revealed himself, she kissed him once and returned to her village. Desire, she later told her granddaughter, is a performance you don't owe anyone. That granddaughter became one of the empire's first female scribes. Wrote that story down. It survives today on a page that smells faintly of ginger and smoke. You look down at your own hands now, stained from the root. Your palms are flushed, your chest warm. Even here, in the quiet of your own room, you feel watched. Not in a creepy way, in a remembered way, as if someone is waiting for you to feel again, to want again. And you begin to understand what the Khmer knew centuries ago, that the body isn't a machine to be wound up or shut off. It's a garden. And some feelings need digging, need dirt, need roots. Modern science has tried to analyze these jungle aphrodisiacs, to isolate active compounds, to bottle the mystery. Some extracts show traces of psychoactive agents. Some have mild muscle relaxants, but none explain the dreams, the visions, the way a single sip could make someone fall in love with moonlight. And maybe that's the point. Not everything ancient was about fact. Some of it was about invitation. To remember that you are flesh. To remember that desire isn't just what you feel. It's what you allowed. So tonight, if you're lying awake, restless, hungry in a way you can't name, imagine this. An old woman, somewhere in a jungle that still remembers your footsteps, handing you a cup of something dark and steaming. She says nothing, just watches as you drink. The heat fills your ribs. And then you dream someone awake. You hear the jingle before you see it, a faint metallic chime, like wind brushing against a string of coins. But as you move closer, you realize it's not coins at all. It's amulets, dozens of them, glinting, under sunlight in a courtyard that smells of salt, copper, and roasted rice. They hang from necks, hips, even ankles, tucked into waistbands or stitched into tunics. Some are discs. Some are triangles. Some are carved into shapes that make your cheeks warm, explicit, bold, unapologetic. Welcome to the talisman market of the Khmer world, where you don't buy luck, you wear it. You run your hand across a copper charm etched with spirals and indecipherable script, and your fingers tingle. Not with magic, with weight. Because this charm, according to the vendor with the silver tooth and sly smile, is a growing guardian, meant to protect its wearer from impotence, heartbreak, and any hexes cast during sex. You laugh. He doesn't. Better to wear, he says, than to regret. These amulets weren't decorations. They were serious business. In an empire where fate could turn on a single misstep, political, romantic, or otherwise, people clung to protective charms like armor. And the ones worn below the waist? Those were the most important. They weren't hidden out of shame. They were positioned for maximum effect. Between thighs, tied to belts, even embedded into undergarments sewn with threads soaked in jasmine. And goat milk. The idea was simple. If the energy center of your body is your most vulnerable and most powerful, then it must be guarded and energized. And sometimes, enhanced. You follow a young man through the market. He's handsome, in a bruised cherry sort of way, wearing a cloth that swings low across his hips. From the edge of it dangles a tiny bell-shaped charm, half concealed. You catch a glimpse of script, ancient Khmer, looping and bold. He catches you looking, grins, and doesn't explain. You later learn that bell-shaped amulets were believed to bring resonance to the lower body. Not just in the erotic sense, though that was part of it. Also in fertility, in spiritual clarity, in the ability to walk with confidence, hips loose, breath steady. And suddenly, it makes sense. That walk isn't arrogance. It's calibrated. There's a record, surprisingly detailed, from a royal scribe named Devith, who catalogued the amulets worn by the king's inner circle. Some were made from silver, some from river stones wrapped in gold thread. One was carved from a tiger's tooth and said to pulse faintly when danger approached. Another, Devith's personal favorite, was a small copper disc engraved with an image of two lovers entwined, their limbs forming a protective circle. He wore it not for seduction, he wrote, but for strength during emotional storms. He was widowed young. Wrote love poetry after that. Mostly to the moon. Not all amulets were gentle. Some were laced with fire literally. A recipe found near the base of Phnom Kulin describes how to make a charm by soaking a strip of cloth in chili oil, wrapping it around a shard of onyx, and sealing it in beeswax. Worn close to the inner thigh, it was said to stir desire in others, while keeping one's own passion unburnt by shame. The phrase recurs in court manuals, burning but unsinged, which sounds like a metaphor for every crush you've ever had. One fringe tidbit: archaeologists once uncovered a skeleton near Siem Reap, buried with over 30 amulets arranged in a spiral from throat to groin. The ones near the head were ceremonial stars, wheels, mantras, but the ones near the pelvis, tiny animals. Frogs, serpents, one even shaped like a beetle mid-coil. Each symbol had a function. Frogs were fertility. Serpents were stamina. Beetles were, well, let's just say persistent. The pattern suggested intentional energy flow. A map, if you will, of how the body should move when stirred by want. Sit now at a stone bench, palm open, as an elder merchant places amulet after amulet in your hand. Each warm from sun, some slick with oil. He says little, letting the shape speak. One is shaped like a closed lotus. Another, a fish with an open mouth. Another, a flame. You ask him how to choose. He looks up, shrugs. What do you need? The question lands heavier than you expect, because this isn't about superstition. It's about intention. What are you hoping for when you slip metal beside your skin? Protection? Power? Permission? There's a story of a young scribe who wore an amulet shaped like a spiral, gifted by a former lover. When asked why he kept it, even years after their separation, he replied, "Because it pulls." Still, that amulet now rests in a museum, displayed as art, but its power isn't in its shape. It's in the fact that someone carried it long, after the relationship faded. A memory you can press between your legs. A keepsake of feeling. In the modern world, we've replaced amulets with deodorant and underwear with motivational quotes. But maybe we lost something in the transition. The Khmer understood that desire isn't random, it's architectural. Built from symbols, from belief, from tiny weighted things that dangle close to the body and say, without words, I matter. I move, I protect. I want. So tonight, if you feel a little uncertain, a little vulnerable in your own skin, imagine this. A small charm, warm against your thigh, whispering through copper or stone that you are held, that your want is old, sacred, and not without. It's armor. The air is damp, not with rain but with heat, the kind that soaks into your bones and makes your skin hum. You step onto a polished stone platform slick with flower petals and mist, and you can hear the water before you see it slow. Rhythmic, hypnotic, trickling through ancient channels carved to sound like wind chimes. The moon hangs low, casting its silver breath across the surface of a long ceremonial pool. And there, just beyond the reeds, someone is bathing. Not hurried, not hidden. This is not a place for shame. This is a ritual. Welcome to the Khmer Empire's moonlit bathing chambers, where scent, intention, and skin all collided in one of the most sacred and seductive practices of the ancient world. You crouch near the edge of the stone, and the aroma wraps around you like a second body. Jasmine, lemongrass, blue lotus, and something deeper, almost musky, like wet stone and warm salt. This isn't your average rinse and repeat hygiene. This is preparation. This is performance. Because when the moon is high and the water still, bodies become temples. And in Khmer tradition, you don't enter a temple without an offering. The figure in the pool is a woman, mid-20s maybe, her body partially cloaked in silk that clings where it shouldn't. She moves with practiced grace, cupping water over her shoulders, then pausing to scatter crushed frangipani blossoms across the surface. Each petal carries a wish, a memory, maybe a name. Behind her, two attendants pour warm, herb-steeped water from carved jugs, one to cleanse, the other to anoint. They're silent, focused, every gesture precise, purposeful. Tonight, the lady isn't just washing, she's summoning, preparing herself for something or someone expected, but never named. This ritual wasn't reserved for royalty. Across the empire, in cities and rice paddies alike, lovers and loners alike took part in moon baths, especially during certain lunar phases. Waxing moons meant invitation ideal for kindling new desire. Full moons meant consummation sacred. Nights for coupling. Waning moons? Those were for release. Letting go of past lovers, pain, and pride. And always the water was touched by plants. Lotus for purity, ginger for courage, orchid for pleasure. Some even added drops of tamarind pulp to sweeten the skin, believing its tang drew kisses the way sugar draws ants. There's a recorded account from an old healer's journal, hidden away in a monastery near Kampong Tom, about a queen who insisted on bathing alone on full moons, no attendants, no guards, just her and the water. She'd slip in after midnight, covered in a paste of rose and gold dust, and float silently for hours. One night, a young priest, curious, foolish, or both, followed her. He crept through the vines, watched her pray, watched her undress. What happened next is blurry. Some say she cursed him with silence. Others say he fell into the pool, and she rescued him, holding him to her chest until he wept like a child. He left the order soon after, married a woman who sold herbs by the river. But every month, on the full moon, he'd light a single candle by the water and whisper something no one else could hear. Historians still argue over the identity of this queen. The pool is real. The story, like all the best ones, survives without needing proof. Moonbathing also had medical merit. The warm infusions were believed to balance the body's internal winds, an ancient Khmer theory of health that connected breath, blood, and libido. If your wind of fire was weak, you were lethargic, sexless. If too strong, you were volatile, easily aroused, and prone to bad decisions. The right bath, with the right herbs at the right moon phase, could restore balance. One fringe tidbit. In elite circles, it was believed that lovers who bathed together under a waxing moon would synchronize their dreams. This wasn't poetic fluff, it was protocol. Couples preparing for arranged marriages were sometimes required to undergo shared immersion rituals, not to test chemistry, but to calibrate emotional resonance. If both dreamt of water, good sign. If one dreamt of drowning, not so much. But make no mistake, these rituals weren't just for peace. They were also for provocation. In some temple districts, public bathing areas were built with specific sightlines. A carved screen here, a strategic gap in the palm fronds there. A glance could be accidental or invitation. Nudity wasn't taboo, but context mattered. A bare back glistening with lotus oil? That said more than any love letter. One erotic poem, etched into a clay lamp now sitting in the Phnom Penh Museum, reads, "She rinsed her hair and the gods blinked. I swallowed my name and dove after it." The author is anonymous. The feeling? Eternal. You now run your fingers along the edge of a bathing stone, cool despite the humid night. You imagine slipping into that water yourself, not to cleanse. 2. Remember, to make your body a vessel for something older than desire, but shaped like it. You'd pour ginger-infused water over your thighs, whisper a name into the petals, and wait. Not for someone to appear, but for permission to feel the want you've been ignoring. Because in Khmer bathing rituals, the magic wasn't always in what came next. It was in giving yourself time to soften, to soak, to become willing again. In modern Cambodia, some echoes remain. Grandmothers still recommend floral baths for new brides. Temples still bless water with herbs during festivals. And in rural villages, moonlit ponds become places where teenagers linger too long, laugh too loud, sneak touches under the guise of tradition. The world has changed, but skin remembers. Water remembers. And somewhere right now, someone is standing, knee-deep in a quiet pool, hoping the person they love is dreaming of them too. So tonight, light a candle. Pour something warm. Let your fingers trace the lip of a bowl. And if you feel your breath deepen, if your heart thuds once, twice, then quickens, you're not just relaxing, you're returning to a place where water speaks, where touch listens, and where the soft splash of a hand against skin is both a promise and a prayer. You press your ear to the stone, and at first there's nothing, just silence, dry and ancient. But then, like water through a crack, something begins to move. A rhythm, a pattern. Not quite music, but close. Not quite prayer, but too intimate to be anything else. You're listening to the remnants of a ritual, once performed beneath the towering spires of Angkor, whispered between bodies in the shadow of gods. The ritual of 9 orgasms. That's what the court physicians called it, though in the sacred texts, it's referred to more poetically as the ladder to transcendence. 9 steps, 9 thresholds, 9 ways to dissolve the self into something more. You straighten, and already the air feels heavier. The stone beneath you isn't cold anymore. It pulses faintly, as if remembering. This wasn't bedroom gossip. This was statcraft, spiritual engineering. The Khmer believed ecstasy, real, sustained, full-bodied ecstasy, could purify not just the individual, but the land around them. It wasn't indulgence. It was obligation. When the king engaged in the ritual with his consort or a selected temple partner, he wasn't just satisfying desire. He was realigning the energies of the realm. His pleasure mirrored the rains. His breathing guided the crops. His climax, if reached in perfect synchronization with his partner, was said to ripple through the earth like thunder, awakening seeds, healing wounds, softening drought. Of course, not every ritual shook the heavens, but the intent was always there. That intimacy wasn't personal, it was political. And deeply sacred. The steps were specific. It began with silence. Partners would sit across from each other, fully clothed, hands on knees, breathing in rhythm. The second step was eye-gazing, not the romantic version, but the kind that stripped you. No blinking, no flinching. Just holding the gaze until your own face began to dissolve. Only then did the physical begin. Not with touch, but with scent. Oils massaged into the air, not the skin. Orchid, agarwood, pepper leaf. Each inhalation deepened the trance. It wasn't about arousal yet. It was about surrender. Only by losing control could you channel something greater. That one of the most detailed surviving accounts comes from a carved ivory cylinder, believed to be the notes of a court healer named Khmer. He writes of preparing the queen for the ritual by brushing her feet with a goose feather soaked in betel juice, while chanting the names of the 9 sacred winds. She began to weep at the third name, he notes. That is how I knew the energy had entered her. He doesn't describe the climax. He doesn't have to. The cylinder ends with a drawing of 2 palms pressed together, surrounded by spirals. Historians still argue over whether Khmer was embellishing or simply translating something untranslatable. But his imagery survives, and it lingers. Each step of the ritual carried its own purpose. The third involved synchronized touch fingertips, tracing mirrored paths across each other's bodies. The fourth, vocalization. Not moaning, but humming, in tones meant to vibrate certain chakras. The fifth, stillness. At the height of anticipation, the partners would freeze, eyes closed, breath held. The tension itself was sacred, like a bowstring, drawn but not released. Only after this moment would the sixth begin. Movement, not frantic, not fast, circular, spiraling. Like water meeting water, the seventh was the first climax, but not of the body, of the breath. A full body shudder caused by nothing but oxygen and intention. The eighth brought the body into alignment, movement, sound, breath, and heartbeats pulsing as one. The ninth and final? Release, physical, emotional, cosmic. If done correctly, both partners would lose all sense of self. Some claimed to see visions, others collapsed, shaking, unable to speak for hours. One lover reportedly forgot their name for 3 days. When asked how they felt, they only replied, "I became a river." Not everyone could complete the ritual. It was considered dangerous to attempt without training. Stories abound of nobles who tried and failed, suffering illness, madness, or in one dramatic tale, spontaneous nosebleeds that left temple floors stained with embarrassment. But for those who succeeded, the rewards were profound. Some were said to glow faintly for days. Others found their memories sharpened, their voices clearer, their skin sweet to the touch. One fringe tidbit: temple dancers trained in the ritual were forbidden to speak for 24 hours afterward. Not out of shame, but preservation. Their mouths were considered sacred zones, too charged for casual words. This practice wasn't hidden. It wasn't scandalous. It was documented in murals, scrolls, even woven into the architecture. Some temples were built with 9 doorways, each representing a threshold in the ritual. Some pools had 9 carved steps leading into the water, a symbolic descent into selflessness. And in one ruined palace near Siem Reap, archaeologists found a chamber with 9 small alcoves, each containing remnants of oils, petals, and soft fabrics. A physical map of pleasure as pilgrimage. And yet, as the empire declined, the ritual faded. Foreign influences brought new shame, new laws. The body became sinful, the breath became private, and the practice, once celebrated, was tucked into whispers and half-remembered songs. Today, some tantric circles in Southeast Asia claim to preserve echoes of the 9 steps. But most, they've been overwritten by modern discomfort. We laugh at long gazes, we flinch from silence. We rush, we forget, but you remember now, sitting here, listening to the stone's heartbeat. You feel the pull not to repeat the ritual, but to honor it, to understand that intimacy is not a sprint, that the body isn't just a site of pleasure, but a temple of timing. That real connection, the kind that cracks the skin of your loneliness and lets the light in, takes patience. And maybe that's what the Khmer knew best. That desire isn't about friction, it's about rhythm. And when 2 people fall into it together, the world changes shape. So tonight, Turn off the lights. Close your eyes. Place your hand on your own heart. Breathe, not to survive, but to arrive. And if you feel something rise, not just heat, but grief or joy or longing, don't stop it. That's your first step. Welcome to the ladder. You smell it before you see it. Thick, musky. Animal. The kind of scent that grabs you by the primitive part of your brain and refuses to let go. It's sweet, but not gentle. Pungent, but not dirty. It smells like damp earth after lightning, like sex and smoke and rain-soaked fur. You wrinkle your nose, but also your skin prickles. Because buried inside that stench is something magnetic. Something ancient. That's when you see them, elephants. Massive, slow-moving, draped in silks, tusks adorned with gold leaf, parading across a clearing like living gods. You're not at a circus. You're at the royal stables of the Khmer Empire. And these aren't beasts of burden. These are vessels of power, and more than that. They're musky factories of lust. Because tonight's ceremonial oil, the one being prepared in a small bronze bowl over a coal fire, has one strange, potent ingredient. Elephant musk. The handlers are already at work scraping dried fluid from behind the ears of a mature bull, collecting it in vials sealed with beeswax. You want to gag, but the attendants, they smile knowingly. Because this stuff, when diluted and mixed with crushed lotus root and honey, becomes one of the most sought-after erotic tonics in the royal court. Known as Marrow's gift, after a mythical beast god of fertility, it was believed to stir desire, boost virility, and even ward off rivals. You touch the edge of the mixing bowl, and the scent floods you, heady, dizzying, like being kissed too fast by someone you shouldn't want. And that's the point. Elephant musk wasn't used to seduce gently. It was used to overwhelm, to conquer. One court record tells of a general who wore a dab of the mixture on his wrists before every negotiation. It wasn't diplomacy he used, it was chemistry. The scent clung to him, made his opponents uneasy, distracted, more likely to agree. When asked his secret, he reportedly smiled and said, "I don't argue, I bloom." And yes, there are other accounts of messier outcomes. One concubine, jealous of a rival, supposedly poured elephant musk into her rival's bath in pure form unmixed. The result? Rashes, vomiting, a week-long exile to the countryside for scent-based misconduct. So yes, dosage mattered. But, done right, it was magic. The ritual of application was its own performance. First, a small circle of cloth soaked in the mixture would be gently warmed in the palm. Then, with 2 fingers, it would be dabbed behind the knees, at the base of the neck, and perhaps most importantly on the navel. The Khmer believed the belly was the body's center of pleasure, the place where laughter, hunger, and desire were all stirred. By placing scent there, you created a magnetic pull. One dancer even described it as wearing thunder. You can imagine her stepping into a banquet hall, hips swaying, and everyone around her breathing just a little faster, without knowing why. And this wasn't just a royal fetish. Musk was democratized. In village rituals for matchmaking, local healers would mix a gentler form of the tonic using goat musk or even fermented rice husk for families who couldn't afford the real thing. But the process remained the same: warmed, blessed, and applied with intention. One fringe tidbit: some temples offered musk readings, where a drop of the substance was placed on the tongue, and the taste supposedly revealed your romantic fate: sweet for success, sour for betrayal, bitter for loneliness. Of course, given how unpredictable elephant musk can be, the real fate might have just been nausea. Let's talk gender again, because elephant musk didn't discriminate. Kings wore it, so did queens, and lovers of all kinds. There's an erotic poem carved into the base of a ruined garden pool that reads, "She wore it in her hair, and I forgot my wife's name." We don't know who wrote it. Just that whoever they never returned to their village. And perhaps they didn't want to. There's even a tale half prayer, half warning of a monk who secretly used elephant musk in his meditations, believing it would help him transcend bodily distractions. Instead, he became obsessed with a passing merchant who wore the scent. Like armor, he broke his vows, followed the man across the empire, died in his arms during a rainstorm, whispering a chant no one could understand. His temple burned the next week. Historians argue whether the story is metaphor or memory. But you can't shake it. That level of devotion, that kind of fall. You now sit beneath one of the great stone reliefs of Angkor, its surface etched with elephants mid-charge, eyes wide, trunks raised. You think about how power and sensuality have always overlapped. How the Khmer didn't separate. Domination from attraction. A war elephant could crush cities, but it could also be the source of the empire's most intimate potions. And maybe that's the paradox. That what terrifies us also draws us in. That the scent of danger sometimes smells like the person we miss the most. Today, true elephant musk is banned, sacred, or simply lost. But its echoes live on. In perfumes labeled animalic, in incense blends smuggled across old trade routes, in whispered recipes passed from grandmother to bride. And maybe, just maybe, in the moments where you smell something wild and unfamiliar, something that makes your pulse quicken and your knees feel less reliable. It might not be musk, but it remembers musk. And that's enough. So tonight, if your body feels heavy, if your dreams smell like heat and hooves, don't run. Lean into it. Let the scent wrap you. Let it remind you that you are made not just of thoughts and rituals, but instincts. And some of them, they're older than language, older than love. They come from a time when gods walked on four legs and desire had tusks dotted burns. Not in a metaphorical, slow-building, romantic kind of way. It burns in a who thought this was a good idea kind of way. You stare at the small clay jar on the table in front of you, its mouth sealed with a waxy plug, the faint scent of chili still biting the back of your throat. This isn't salsa. This is fire. Fire meant for skin. More precisely, for places skin shouldn't burn. You found one of the Khmer Empire's most notorious and misunderstood aphrodisiacs. The chili salve. A concoction of crushed bird's eye chili, galangal, lemongrass, and fermented palm resin, all mashed into a stinging red paste that someone, somewhere, thought was a good idea to apply directly to the body's most sensitive parts. You reach for a cloth, just touching the residue from the rim, and instantly your fingertips tingle. If this is what mild contact does, you don't want to know what full application feels like. And yet you kind of do, because as much as it sounds like torture, this fiery salve wasn't punishment. It was foreplay, a test, a thrill, a dare whispered between lovers who liked their desire with a side of adrenaline. Used carefully, sparingly. Strategically, it was said to heighten sensation to an unbearable pitch, drawing blood to the surface, making even the lightest touch feel like thunder. It wasn't for amateurs. This was elite-level seduction. A reminder that danger and pleasure often drink from the same cup. There's a court document, half medical, half scandal sheet from the reign of Jayavarman VIII, detailing a case where a concubine used the chili salve on the king without warning. It was meant as a joke, a playful prank. He reportedly roared loud enough to summon 4 guards and an astrologer. She was not punished. In fact, he later asked for the recipe. "I want to meet my enemies with this kind of focus," he allegedly said. And perhaps he did. The next battle he fought lasted under 2 days. Coincidence? Probably. But the salve became popular afterward among royal guards and generals seeking strategic invigoration. Applied properly, it was used along pressure. Points behind the ears, the inner wrist, the hollow where thigh meets hip, not for continuous wear, but for moments of impact. A kiss following a dab of chili oil became unforgettable. A breath over salve-warmed skin could provoke shivers deep enough to make someone forget their name. Lovers would challenge each other with it, each daring the other to last longer, to resist, to surrender first. It became a game, a ritual, and, in some cases, a very awkward trip to the court healer, but this was never mainstream. It was a fringe tradition, often whispered about rather than openly practiced, used by dancers who knew exactly how far to tease, by warriors who had been too close to death and wanted to feel something sharp, by priests who believed purification came not from comfort, but from confrontation. One fringe tidbit: a sect of mystics near what is now Kampong Spew believed that chili salve could burn away false desire. They'd apply a diluted version to their palms before meditation, forcing themselves to focus through the sting. Pain as clarity. Clarity as prayer. There's a love story buried in the temple records that reads like a fever dream. A noble woman, known for her aloofness and intellect, was courted by dozens. She ignored them all, until one bold dancer challenged her, promising to win her heart not with words, but with heat. He arrived at her villa with 2 clay pots, one filled with rose water, the other with chili salve. "Choose your path," he said. She picked the salve. He applied it to her wrists. She didn't flinch. He applied it to his own throat. She smiled. They married a month later. Divorce records? None. That might be the most impressive part. Of course, mistakes were made. Apprentices who didn't understand dilution. Lovers who confused jars. A servant once applied chili salve to his master's sandals instead of foot balm. The man couldn't walk for a week and banned chilies from his estate. And yet, even with the risks, the salve persisted. Because for some, arousal wasn't about ease. It was about edge. The knowledge that you're playing with something that could scorch you. That might already be doing so. Modern descendants of this formula still exist in small secret markets. Oils sold in unmarked bottles, labeled only with warnings or winks. Some are fakes, some are mild, but a few still carry the fire. Users describe them as awakening, blinding, like tasting the sun through skin. The allure isn't just the sensation, it's the ritual, the anticipation. The moment just before contact, when the body tenses and the breath catches and everything becomes sharper. You sit back now, staring at the fading sun. Your fingers still buzz. You think about how pleasure and pain are often less about what happens, and more about what you expect to happen. The Khmer knew this. They didn't just craft desire, they choreographed it. With oil, with scent, with spice. They understood that the body isn't binary. It doesn't divide cleanly into good and bad, soft and hard, safe and wild. It's all of it at once. So tonight, if your heart races and your skin sings, and something inside you says yes even as you flinch, maybe don't pull away. Maybe that burn is exactly the reminder you need. That you're still here, still wanting, still capable of being touched in ways that leave heat long after the fire goes out. It begins with paper. Thin, golden, nearly translucent. You run your fingers across it, and it crackles like old secrets, smooth, delicate, and brimming with intent. Someone has taken the time to fold this sheet precisely 3 times, along invisible creases that feel ritualistic. Then you notice the scent rose, smoke, and a whisper of ink. This is no ordinary message. This is a perfumed letter, sealed not with wax, but with dried orchid pressed flat like a breath someone didn't release. You hold it to your nose, your chest tightens. Inside this folded universe is a story, a promise, maybe even a confession. Welcome to the lost art of Khmer erotic correspondence, where desire wasn't just touched or tasted, but written, encoded, and delivered under moonlight. The court of Angkor was many things. Glorious, brutal, spiritual, but also delightfully sneaky. In a world where most alliances were arranged and flirtation could be fatal, the written word became a lifeline. Lovers, who could not speak, who could not look, who could not risk a smile in public, turned to poetry disguised as riddles, metaphors buried in rice paper, ink strokes so loaded they throbbed like veins. One popular device was to hide erotic messages within innocuous-looking scrolls. A political report might contain 2 lines of illicit verse embedded in the margins. A prayer scroll could mask a love note written upside down in a different ink. And if the scent lingered longer than the paper deserved, that was a message too. You unfold the letter. The script is curved, ornamental, soft like it was written mid-sigh. It reads, "The moon rises twice in your absence." That's it. Number. Signature, no address. Just an ache dressed in metaphor. You imagine the sender. A temple dancer, perhaps, or a diplomat's son. Someone with too much longing and too little freedom. These letters were passed hand to hand, hidden in fruit baskets, sewn into clothing hems, slipped into offerings at temple shrines. And they weren't always about seduction. Sometimes they were warnings, he knows. Or requests, meet. Me by the lotus gate when the water turns warm. There's a story, almost too perfect to believe, of a royal librarian who fell for a general. She couldn't speak to him. Couldn't even look at him directly. But she handled the records. And he left fingerprints. So she began composing letters on discarded scroll ends, writing only in metaphor. Your breath stirs pages I haven't opened. I shelve books, but you unbind me. Each night, she placed a new message inside a hollowed-out copy of a Ramayana. Each morning, the book would be gone. No reply, just absence. Until one day, in the scroll chamber, she found a single folded note wedged in her inkpot. War returns me to dust, but you're the ink. She was never seen again. Some say she fled with him. Some say she became a ghost who haunts the library halls. Either way, the story is still told. And the Ramayana in question? Still in storage. Its pages smell faintly of sandalwood, but perhaps the most delicious detail was the use of code. Lovers used flowers, numbers, and even punctuation marks to say what they could not risk writing directly. A single drop of red ink meant longing. 3 small dots in the corner of the page meant I saw you. A diagonal fold across the bottom meant tonight. Whole conversations happened this way, wordless, fragrant, and charged with the kind of tension that makes the skin hum. And it wasn't all heterosexual. Khmer court culture had fluidity. Letters passed between female attendants, between soldiers, between priests and performers. One archived note from a female scribe to another reads, "Your laugh spills across my day like jasmine wine. I am drunk in your silence." It's unsigned, unclaimed, but it lives on, copied by hand into a dozen hidden archives. Because when desire can't speak, it writes. And when it writes well, it survives. There's a fringe tidbit from the ruins of a merchant's compound near the Mekong Delta. Archaeologists uncovered dozens of clay jars buried beneath the floorboards, each containing scraps of paper with short, often naughty verses. One reads simply, "Your hands wrote on me, I'm still smudged." Some speculate the jars were confession vessels, a kind of emotional latrine where desires could be stored, hidden, maybe even neutralized. Others think it was a love archive. Either way, the ink bled. The words burned. The power of these letters wasn't just in their poetry. It was in their risk. In a palace where eyes watched every step, where tongues wagged faster than birds, writing down your desire was like lighting a fire in a field of dry grass. One wrong metaphor, one misdelivered fold, and reputations crumbled. Lovers exiled. Families dishonored, but still they wrote. Because words could cross thresholds that bodies couldn't. And scent? That was the signature. A letter that arrived unscented was cautious, platonic, but a letter that smelled like rose oil and clove? That was an invitation. You hold the page closer now, and it seems to warm in your hand. You wonder who it was meant for. You wonder if they ever read it, or if it's sat, folded and forgotten, like so many feelings we keep tucked away, waiting for the right moment. And maybe that's the point. That desire doesn't always shout. Sometimes it folds itself into corners, whispers through ink, and waits. Today, love letters feel like relics, replaced by emojis, texts, likes. But something is missing in that. Something tactile. Khmer lovers knew that to send a letter was to send a piece of your breath, a fingerprint of your longing. And even if it was never answered, it still lived. Still carried the echo of "I see you, I want you, I'm thinking of you so hard." The paper had to know. So tonight, if your phone feels too quiet, if your heart itches with unspoken sentences, take a piece of paper. Write badly. Fold clumsily. Scent it with whatever cologne you still have from last year. And maybe, just maybe, leave it where someone might find it. Or maybe don't. Maybe keep it, like the Khmer did. A folded flame in a dark drawer. Proof that longing lives best when it's written, sealed, and almost but not quite forgotten. You've never seen desire shift shape like this. One moment, it's a deep voice whispering your name with smoke on its breath. The next, it's slender fingers adjusting earrings that glint like moonlight in memory. Then it's neither. Then it's both. You're watching a person walk across a garden, hips fluid, smile teasing, wrapped in silk that doesn't hide so much as dare you to look deeper. They are not a he, not a she. They are a prayer answered in plural. And everyone in the Khmer court knows them by reputation, if not by name. You're witnessing sacred seduction, the kind not bound by gender, but liberated by it. Because in the Khmer Empire, desire didn't play by the binaries. It danced. Let's tear up a myth real quick, that the past was always rigid, always oppressive, always male versus female, this or that. Not here. Not then. The Khmer understood something. We're just now starting to catch up to that identity. When left unchained, is one of the most potent aphrodisiacs on earth. Temple inscriptions, dance manuals, and healer scrolls from the 10th to 13th centuries speak openly of third bodies, people who did not conform to gendered roles, but instead embodied elements of both or neither, or something in between entirely. And far from being marginalized, they were revered in certain circles, trained in arts of pleasure, diplomacy, and dream interpretation. Some were lovers, some were spiritual guides, some were both. One record from a temple district outside Priya, Vihir, tells of a figure known only as Kessin, who served as both healer and court performer. Kessin was said to speak in two registers, low and rich when reciting sacred texts, light and lyrical when dancing. Their touch was rumored to calm infants, ignite soldiers, and silence arguments. Lovers of all genders sought their company, not just for physical pleasure, but for clarity. When Kessin lays beside you, one poem notes, you wake knowing your name again. These individuals, often referred to in temple code as the flexible flame, wore clothing that blended male and female symbols. Gold-threaded robes with slits designed to reveal just enough to confuse the unworthy observer. Perfume that smelled like night rain and open flowers. Jewelry worn deliberately asymmetrical, one heavy earring, one feather light. When they walked into a room, conversation stalled, not from scandal, from awe, because you weren't sure whether to bow, flirt, or confess. Their role extended beyond the sensual. Many served as matchmakers, understanding the deep tangle of human desire better than anyone else. They guided couples through rituals not by imposing structure, but by asking better questions. Where do you feel most seen? When did your skin last sing? These weren't healers who offered herbs and hope. They offered truth. With a laugh sharp as chili, or a whisper so soft it broke open a hardened heart. And in the royal court, they were essential. Kings and queens would consult them before weddings, before negotiations, before choosing new dancers or lovers. Not because they were mystical, or at least not only that, but because they carried something most people feared to confront: the full range of human want. There's a story, passed down in fragmented palm leaf manuscripts, of a high-ranking minister who became dangerously obsessed with one such figure. His desire turned controlling, possessive. When the figure refused to be claimed, he tried to have them exiled. The king intervened, not to protect the minister, but to protect the balance. When you try to possess fire, the edict read, you burn your own house. One fringe tidbit: in certain temple ceremonies, these third body figures were chosen to channel divine union, representing both Shiva and Shakti, male and female cosmic energies. During solstice rituals, they would wear dual masks and perform dances meant to awaken the body's unfolding path, a metaphor for erotic potential unbound by gender. Observers weren't expected to understand. They were expected to feel. And many did, deeply. Some reported ecstatic visions. Others simply cried. Because when someone moves like they've let go of categories, it makes you question the ones you've built around yourself. And yes, they had lovers, sometimes powerful ones. One archived poem, scratched into a clay tablet and hidden in a hollow pillar, tells of a queen who abandoned her marriage bed for a garden, where a third-body lover waited with mango and wine. You tasted of both sword and silk, it reads. I returned to duty, but not to desire. No name, no ending, just that line. That ache. But let's not romanticize everything. These figures walked a dangerous line. Revered in some circles, feared in others. Their ability to unmask people's hidden truths made them targets. Some were accused of sorcery. A few disappeared mysteriously after powerful affairs. One was said to have been imprisoned in a tower lined with mirrors, punished. Not with pain, but with reflection. Another legend says they escaped disguised as a market vendor, their voice shifting mid-bargain to confuse the guards. Still, their influence persisted, because desire doesn't vanish. It adapts, it finds the cracks in dogma and seeps through. And the Khmer Empire, despite its strict hierarchies, left space, however narrow, for those who could shapeshift. Not just in form, but in purpose. And that space? It wasn't just tolerated. In certain moments, it was cherished. Today, their traces are faint but present. In the dance gestures passed down through generations. In the ambiguous deities carved into temple corners. In the quiet pride of those who feel both masculine and feminine and something beyond. And in every moment when someone steps outside of what's expected, not to shock, but to feel true. So tonight, if your reflection doesn't fit neatly into one frame, if your voice carries notes you didn't expect, if your desire stretches in directions you can't name, don't shrink, don't flinch. Light a candle, walk the garden, wear silk and steel. And remember, somewhere in the past someone walked boldly so you could step gently. So you could look at the night and say, I am not one, I am many, and I want with all of them. There's a scent in the room, thick, floral, almost suffocating, like crushed magnolias left to wilt in the sun. The walls are high, smooth, and echoless. No doors, just drapes. Layers of them. Silk dyed deep red, hanging in the still air like heavy secrets. You're standing inside what was once the Queen's private chamber, though chamber feels too small a word. This is no simple boudoir. This is a stage, a labyrinth, a trap. Welcome to the heart of the Khmer court's most dangerous game, where desire and death shared perfume, and a single night could rewrite the balance of power. It's here, wrapped in shadows and oil and silence, that jealousy festered like a second skin, and the line between seduction and sabotage vanished entirely. They say the Queen never slept alone. Not because she feared the dark, but because power, like heat, must be constantly circulated. On some nights, she invited scholars, young and sharp-tongued, to read poems by the candlelight while she soaked in rosewater. Other nights, she chose dancers, their wrists perfumed and bodies painted with crushed silver. Rarely did she pick the same companion twice. Rarer still was the one who left before sunrise. The walls remember them, the ones who came willingly, and the ones who stayed too long. You press your hand to the floor, feel the cool of the polished stone, and imagine the weight of all those moments piled on top of one another. This room wasn't just where love happened. It's where consequences began. There's a legend, known in pieces, about a favored concubine named Riamia. She arrived at court as a gift from a minor noble family, beautiful and clever, eyes like wet ink. The queen noticed her not for her looks, but for her silence. Riamia didn't flatter, didn't perform, she watched. One night, unannounced, the queen sent for her. The guards were confused. She wasn't trained in the sacred arts. She wasn't on the rotation, but the queen insisted. Riamia entered this room in a linen wrap and left 2 days later, her voice hoarse, her skin glowing like she'd been kissed by the sun itself. From that night on, she was never seen in public again. But she wrote letters, beautiful, cruel, insightful letters, to generals, to foreign princesses, to the king. Some believe she dictated policy from within these walls, whispering her thoughts through curtains and flower arrangements. Until one morning, the queen awoke alone. Riamia was gone. No one spoke of her again, except the perfume remained. Stronger than ever, the queen's perfumes were infamous. Blended with crushed gardenia, camphor, saffron, and one particularly controversial ingredient, ambergris, scraped from the intestines of whales that washed ashore. The scent was said to linger on the skin for days, long after the memory of her touch had faded. It wasn't just fragrance, it was strategy. She would wear a different blend depending on who was summoned, sharp for rivals, sweet for allies, powdery for fools. And when she mixed two, it was a sign of manipulation. A layered scent meant a layered message. You could spend hours decoding her body language and still get the message wrong. But the perfume? That never lied. One fringe tidbit: the queen reportedly commissioned a special bed, shaped like a lotus, carved from sandalwood and hollowed in the center to conceal cooling herbs. Not for comfort, but for sensory control. Anyone who lay beside her would slowly be overwhelmed by scent, taste, and heat. Not enough to knock them out, but enough to make memories soft around the edges. It was said that people would leave her, presence unsure whether they had spoken or only dreamed. And in that fog, she made her moves, but not all power was subtle. Some was explosive. There's a court record, sealed with the royal emblem, detailing an assassination attempt inside this very room. A visiting prince, young, eager, and stupid, tried to poison the queen's bath salts with a diluted root known to cause seizures. She knew. She let him think it had worked. Then, the next night, she invited him back, dressed him in ceremonial robes, fed him rose wine, kissed his shoulder. Then, with a whisper, she told him the truth. He died hours later, face frozen in something between terror and awe. The official cause was fever, but the perfume? It told the real story. It was the same scent she had worn the night she first arrived at court. Historians still argue whether this queen was one woman or a composite of many. The stories overlap, diverge, contradict. But the room is real, the scent is still in the stone, and the lessons, those linger. In Khmer court culture, love wasn't private, it was a tool, a risk, a tactic as sharp as any blade. The queen's chamber wasn't a retreat, it was a theater, a war room, a shrine. You now sit at the edge of the bed, your hand on the silk sheets. They've faded with time, but in the folds, you can still see fingerprints, traces of weight, movement, pressure. Someone gripped this fabric, maybe in passion, maybe in fear. you think about the lives that were changed right here. Some elevated, some extinguished, all touched by the same hands. Today, the room is mostly empty, but its spirit isn't. In modern Cambodia, the story of the Queen's Chamber is still whispered in bathhouses, in perfume shops, in late-night confessions between lovers who think, maybe, just maybe, they were meant to wield more than just affection. They were meant to wield attention. And that's what the Queen understood best. That seduction isn't always about being wanted. Sometimes it's about being remembered, burned into someone's senses like a song they can't stop humming, like a scent they can't scrub off their pillow. So tonight, if you find yourself drawn to danger, if you light a candle, smooth your sheets, and wear a scent you haven't touched in years, remember, you are not just preparing for sleep. You're stepping into a story, one that began long ago with a queen, a secret, and a scent strong enough to survive even history. You hear the clink before you see it, wooden spoons against ceramic pots, pestles pounding thick green pastes into chipped mortar bowls. The sound is steady, comforting, ancient. You turn the corner and step into the smoke-draped kitchen of a midwife who smells of lime peel, old prayers, and the kind of authority that doesn't need raising her voice. Her hands are stained with turmeric, her hair twisted into a knot that's held the secrets of 50 lovers and maybe a few gods. She's not just a cook. She's not just a healer. She's something in between, a keeper of desires and destroyer of delusions. This is where Khmer aphrodisiac brews were truly born, not in palaces but in kitchens like this one. Rooms filled with steam and shadows, where every herb had a story and every recipe could double as a warning. You sit on a woven mat by the fire, and she hands you a cup before you ask what's in it. It's warm, thick, and tinted like old gold. You sip, it tastes like jasmine clove, maybe snake fruit. Sweet, until the bitterness creeps in like a delayed dare. She watches you the way a spider might watch a fly, fondly, patiently, with full understanding of how this ends. That one's for softening, she says, not the body, the mind. Makes truth easier to tell. And just like that, you realize these brews weren't just about stirring loins. They were about loosening masks, about unlocking doors people forgot they had closed. The most revered kitchen workers in the Khmer Empire were not servants, they were alchemists. They knew how to boil infatuation into a tea, how to crush envy into a powder, how to fold powdered tamarind, galangal, and honey into a syrup that made even the most repressed noblemen write poems in the margins of tax documents. And yes, they knew how to bring fire to the blood, but the good ones? They knew how to cool it too. There's a tale about a woman named Melia, a former courtesan who retired from court life and opened an herb shop on the city's edge. Clients came for remedies, but they stayed for the real medicine, listening. Melia had the rare talent of looking at someone and knowing whether they needed stimulation or stillness. She brewed a tea she called Rain on a Hot Roof, made from crushed pandan leaf, white pepper, and a mysterious root she never named. It didn't make people fall in love. It made them remember who they had loved and why. She said that was more useful, more honest. One visitor drank it, burst into tears, and left his job the next day. He returned a month later with flowers and a limp apology. Melia nodded, handed him a different blend. Now, she said, you can begin. These women healers, harlots, herbalists operated in a space men couldn't fully access. Not because they were excluded, but because they didn't know how to listen to boiling water. They didn't understand that the hum of a leaf hitting hot oil carried just as much meaning as a verse in Sanskrit. The true recipes weren't written down. They were passed palm to palm, whispered while grinding seeds, stitched into lullabies, sung to babies who didn't yet know their power. And the ingredients? Often laughably simple. Lemon basil, toasted sesame, water that had been left to sit overnight under a full moon. But it wasn't what went in, it was how it was made. Timing, intention. The energy of the breath blown across the rim of the pot before serving. That's what made a love potion stick. That's what made a lover return. There's a fringe tidbit from the outskirts of Angkor Wat, where a collapsed storeroom revealed dozens of ceramic jars sealed with wax and cloth. Inside were crusted remnants of ancient brews. One, when rehydrated in lab conditions, released the scent of betel and coconut so strong it made the lab assistant blush. Another, when tested, had traces of fig, ginger, and what may have been crocodile bile. Used sparingly, it was said to enhance tactile sensitivity, particularly in the fingertips and spine. The recipe was etched faintly on the side of the jar. The last line read, "Use only when the moon is watching." But not all brews were romantic. Some were for revenge. One lover, abandoned by a merchant who married richer, reportedly commissioned a brew that caused vivid, erotic dreams involving her image for the new wife. Every night, for weeks. The merchant couldn't explain the sudden shift. The wife grew cold. The lover sent a note. "You can have him, but you'll dream of me." Whether it worked or not, the story spread. And the tea she used? A blend of dried hibiscus, chili threads, and 1 clove soaked in vinegar. The merchants started watching their teacups more closely after that. The modern world dismisses this kind of thing. We call it folklore, superstition, fantasy. But walk through a Cambodian market today, and you'll still find stalls with shelves of amber bottles, bundles of dried leaves tied with red string, handwritten signs promising balance, harmony, and heat. Some are tourist bait, but some are made by granddaughters of grandmothers who once served in those kitchens. The recipes aren't exact, but the hands remember. You sip again. The cup is nearly empty. The old woman's eyes haven't left. You feel a warmth in your chest, not lust, not love, but something quieter, readiness. Maybe that's what the best brews do. They don't invent desire. They clear the fog. They point you back toward what you've been afraid to want. So tonight, if you find yourself drawn to your own kitchen, not for hunger, but for something deeper, don't ignore it. Light a small flame, crush something fragrant, stir something old, and listen. Not for instructions, something shifts in the air, quick, cold, almost electric. It's the kind of feeling that makes the hairs on your arm lift before your brain catches up. You're not alone. Not in a haunted sense, but in that ancient, spine-deep way that says, something bigger is watching. You're standing in front of a temple, its stone steps slick with moss and secrets, and the carvings along the lintel are not the usual dancers or rice harvests. These are angrier, wilder, gods with teeth, eyes bulging wide, hands not raised in blessing, but clenched. You've stumbled upon a warning. A place where passion got too loud, too real, and the heavens, jealous, petty, divine, decided to strike back. This is what happened when mortals pushed pleasure too far. Welcome to the edge of desire, where even the gods got jealous. In Khmer mythology, gods weren't detached observers sipping nectar on clouds. They were participants, emotionally volatile, easily offended, sometimes obsessed. They fell in love with mortals. They disguised themselves as lovers. They rewarded and punished not through abstract karma, but through direct, intimate interference. And when mortals began performing rituals that invoked ecstasy, real, prolonged body-burning ecstasy, the gods noticed. And some didn't like it. There's a temple legend from the north, Phnom Kulin's shadows, about a priestess named Vedi, who taught couples how to make love in alignment with the lunar cycle. Her techniques weren't just physical. They were spiritual choreography. Breath, pressure, sound each time to call down divine energy and channel it through the body. People claimed they could see light ripple across their skin. Some said they could hear the pulse of the universe in their fingertips. Crowds grew. Couples traveled for days to learn. And then one day, the water in the temple basin turned black. The sacred trees around the shrine began to wither. The offerings went untouched. The gods had turned away. According to temple inscriptions, the high priests declared that Vedi's teachings had crossed into arrogance, that mortals had begun to believe they could summon the divine without reverence-only rhythm. Vedi vanished soon after. Some say she was taken by the gods. Others say she left in silence. Her knowledge passed to a single student who disappeared into the jungle. What remains of her story is etched into the base of her ruined tower. A spiral, a heartbeat, and the phrase, "We woke them." This wasn't an isolated incident. In several temples across the Khmer Empire, carvings that once depicted sensual rituals were later chiseled over, replaced with images of restraint, hierarchy, asceticism. The shift was clear. The gods wanted boundaries, and they weren't subtle about enforcing them. Floods were blamed on impure unions. Famines were linked to unbalanced desire. The very thing that once connected humans to the divine had become dangerous, too effective, too disruptive, too human. There's a fringe tidbit about a sacred scroll found locked in a stone box beneath Angkor Wat's west wing. It contains a list of prohibited positions, each one paired with a corresponding celestial reaction eclipse. Drought, miscarriage, war. One line reads, "If two mirror each other beneath the third moon, the river will turn." Was this theology or political control? Historians still argue. But one thing's certain, people believed. And when people believe something strongly enough, it becomes true whether the gods are real or not. But the jealousy wasn't just about the sex. It was about the power. When mortals discovered they could reach transcendence through intimacy without temples, without priests, it threatened the entire cosmic hierarchy. A farmer and his lover could lie under a banyan tree, share breath, and enter a state that previously required years of fasting and prayer. That's liberation. And to some, liberation looks like rebellion, especially to divine beings who prefer obedience. One erotic poem from the period, banned shortly after its creation, begins, "We touched until the gods blinked." It ends with, "They looked away. We kept going." It's both defiant and tender, a love letter to mortal audacity. It survived only because a monk copied it into the margins of a geography text, perhaps out of spite, perhaps out of solidarity. Of course, not all gods disapproved. Some were invoked specifically to bless carnal rituals. The goddess of fertility, often depicted nude and laughing, was said to dance beside lovers who truly surrendered. But her siblings? Less enthusiastic. Stories abound of divine lovers cursing mortals out of envy. One tale tells of a god who fell in love with a male dancer, and upon being rejected, caused the dancer's tongue to swell so he could no longer perform sacred chants. Another tells of a goddess who, angered by her favorite priest falling for a temple musician, poisoned the musician's breath. The musician sang one last song. It caused rain to fall for 7 days straight. These stories were more than myths. They were caution, echo. They reminded people that ecstasy has gravity, that when you touch the sublime through flesh, you don't leave unchanged, and someone, somewhere might notice, might not approve. Today you still see traces of these tensions, in the carved-over faces of once sensual bas-reliefs, in lullabies that warn children not to dance after dark, in incense recipes that cool the body after acts of pleasure. And yet, people remember. They still perform rituals in secret, still light candles and share forbidden techniques passed down in code. Because the desire to connect to each other, to something bigger, is older than temples, older than fear. You look up at the sky. The stars are clearer than they should be. You think about all the lovers, past and present, who reached for each other not just for warmth, but for divinity. And you wonder, is it so wrong to chase God through the body? To taste heaven with your hands? Maybe the gods weren't jealous. Maybe they were just surprised. that mortals could build altars out of breath, and offer prayers with their mouths full of someone else's name. So tonight, if you feel the urge to light a candle not for ritual, but for pleasure, do it. If you move with someone in the dark and feel the stars hold their breath, smile. You're not just touching skin, you're touching history. And somewhere, a god is either weeping or watching. Maybe both. You're in a market now, no stone temples, no perfumed courtyards, just tarps flapping in the wind, wooden tables groaning under baskets of leaves, roots, and jars so dusty they look older than memory. Motorbikes hum in the background. A toddler shrieks with glee over a coconut. And in the farthest corner, past the stalls selling mango, incense, and fried eels, there she is. Old, almost invisible, seated behind a curtain of dangling garlic bulbs and lemongrass braids. Her table is covered in little bottles, no labels, no prices. Just a look in her eye like she's seen everything twice. This isn't a relic. This is the last echo of a history that refuses to die. You ask for something light, for a friend. You lie, and she smiles without her teeth. For dreaming, for fire, or for forgetting? She asks. You freeze. Because that's it, isn't it? Even now, after temples have crumbled and kings turn to dust, the language of desire survives. Not in stone, in scent, in herbs, in the quiet rituals that live behind curtains and under ribs. Welcome to the modern echoes of Khmer aphrodisiacs, where the ancient still simmers beneath plastic tarps and cellophane. She gives you a bottle. It's warm, tinted amber. When you uncork it, the scent punches you with something too complicated to name. Part mint, part sweat, part memory of someone you tried to forget but didn't. She says it's made with sweet bark, bitter flower, and one secret. You don't ask what. You know better. These brews aren't about ingredients. They're about stories. And the story this one tells is old. Bodies want. Even after centuries of colonization, modernization, shame campaigns, and synthetic perfume, the same instinct still stirs beneath the surface. And in Cambodia, where memory is always braided with myth, aphrodisiacs haven't disappeared. They've just gone underground. You walk past stalls selling pills claiming to restore male energy, teas marketed as female fire, roots bundled with red thread. Some are scams. Some aren't. One vendor offers you a black lollipop, wrapped in wax paper. It tastes like molasses and regret. Makes you remember her, he says. You ask who? Whoever you're pretending not to, he replies. It's a joke, maybe. But for the rest of the day, your chest feels heavy in a way you don't entirely hate. It's not just markets. In upscale spas, you'll find massage oils made from herbs once reserved for temple rituals. They don't call them aphrodisiacs anymore. They say rejuvenating, harmonizing, deepening connection. But the hands that apply them still follow the same patterns. Still press where the old text said to press. Still pause just long enough to make your heart skip. One spa owner, when asked about her most popular oil blend, simply says, "We don't advertise it. People find it when they're ready." She won't explain what's in it. Only that couples leave quieter than they arrived. And then there are the drinks. Sweet iced teas that tingle on the tongue, sold on the side of the road by teenagers who don't know, or don't care, that the roots inside trace their lineage back to forest priestesses. One scholar even tracked modern ingredients in popular Khmer street beverages and found several that match historical libido enhancers. They're still here, just cheap now. Just humble. Hidden in plain thirst. There's a fringe tidbit circulating on local forums. Stories of a monk in the hills who brews a memory tonic using ancient recipes passed down through chance, not paper. He only serves it to those grieving or in heartbreak. One foreigner claimed he drank it and dreamt of a lover he hadn't seen in a decade. Woke up sobbing into a stranger's lap. Maybe placebo, maybe not. But the story is being told. And that's the point. That even now, when desire is medicalized, marketed, filtered through dating apps and pills. There's still a place in the world where it's brewed slowly by hand, with leaves that remember. And you start to feel the tingle of understanding. That these forgotten aphrodisiacs were never really forgotten. They were just reframed, tucked into the backs of drawers, whispered about behind closed doors, passed from grandmother to granddaughter with a wink and a warning. The world told them to disappear, but instead, they adapted. Like vines, like want, even abroad, among diaspora communities, these traditions linger. One Cambodian American woman recalls her mother boiling lemongrass and tamarind on dates she couldn't explain. She said it made the house welcoming. She laughs. But it always happened when someone special was coming over. Another man remembers his grandfather chewing betel and telling his teenage self, "Don't kiss with a dry mouth. Kiss with spice." At the time, he thought it was nonsense. Now he's not so sure. You return to the stall at the end of the day. The old woman is still there. You ask her if the bottle worked. She shrugs. Depends what you wanted. You pause, think, then say, "I don't know." She nods, satisfied. Then you're still alive. And maybe that's what desire really is, not certainty, not climax, but the ache that keeps you looking, tasting, hoping. The echo of bodies long gone still humming through your veins, saying, "There's more." So tonight, take a moment. Open your window. Let the warm air drift across your skin. Brew something strange. Touch your own wrist like it's a stranger's. And remember, the Khmer didn't separate lust from spirit, body from ritual. They knew that every heartbeat is a kind of prayer. And every scent, every taste, every brush of skin has the power to awaken the parts of you thought were lost. This isn't just a history of what they used. It's a history of what we still want. So now, with the story complete and your breath just a little slower, let's ease into stillness together. The jungle's roar has faded to a soft hum. The temples have gone quiet, their stones warm from memory but resting now. Shadows stretching long and gentle across the ground. The markets are closed, the bottles tucked away. The dancers are sleeping. Even the gods, for once, are looking elsewhere. You've wandered through a world thick with longing, not the loud, cinematic kind, but the quiet ache that sits just behind the ribs, waiting for you to notice. And maybe, just maybe you did. Maybe you felt something stir. Maybe you remembered a scent. A name, a version of yourself that once whispered instead of scrolled. Don't chase it. Just breathe with it. Let the story settle into your muscles. Like heat from a warm bath. You don't need to remember every detail. Just remember how it felt. Soft, lush, sacred. Like slipping into sheets still warm from someone else's sleep. And as you close your eyes tonight, maybe dream of jasmine and river light. Maybe float a little between memory and myth. You're safe now. You're not alone. You've wandered far and come home to yourself. End of script. Sweet dreams.